Very warm greetings everyone. Welcome to the lecture series on Introduction to Environmental Economics. Today the title of the lecture is Environmental Regulation, Part A. Learning objectives of this particular lecture would be to provide rationale for the role of government, to assert the case of environmental regulation, to discuss various theories related to regulation. The lecture will discuss the political economy of regulation at length. To describe the basic environmental regulation instruments. Now, the role of government is critical for the regulation in case of environmental goods. Government can play an active role in solving the problems associated with pollution. And this is the issue which everywhere in the country, in various cities, we are currently facing. In some cases, government will play a modest role by laying down the rules to solve the pollution problem, while in other cases, government plays a more crucial and active role directly with the polluters about reducing their emissions and the amount of emissions by freezing the amount of emissions allowed. And sometimes, although the government can solve the problem of decentralized markets, but the government sometimes can also fail. Now, the problem is that the government intervention is not always successful. It is not a final cure for the market failure. So therefore, keeping that in mind, what kind of regulation are we expecting from the government and what is the theory behind it? This is what we need to explore. Rationale for regulation. Why do we need a regulation in case of environment? Economic regulation involves government intervention in a variety of ways. There are two basic theories behind constructing or providing a framework for regulation. Among these two theories, the first theory, which is the public interest theory, and the second theory, a very well known theory, is the interest group theory. So based on these two theories, underlying theories, of environmental regulation is built up for a country, a region, national level, international level. Now let us go through the basic underlying theories behind the environmental regulation. Public interest theory. As the name suggests, public interest theory of regulation views the purpose of regulation as promotion of public interest. So basically, as the name, it is very reflective from the name, that public interest, that basically the idea behind, the notion behind launching or implementing or framing environmental regulation is purely the public interest. There are maybe considered as three reasons for implementing regulation, and that those three reasons could be, from the economics point of view, it could be because of imperfect competition, imperfect information, and externalities, the presence of externalities where the markets completely fail. As we all know that imperfect competition is where the government intervention is required for efficiency. The interest group theory of regulation views the purpose of regulation in a different manner. It is for promoting, not for the public interests as such, but for promoting the narrow interests of particular group of society or group of people, such as some of the industrial group or in individual industries, or a sub kind of a clan of the society, some kind of a group of the society which they identify themselves with. So catering to their particular interests of that particular group would lead to an underlying theory of regulation, that is interest group theory. So there are two different types of theories. First is, we discussed the public interest theory, and the other one is interest group theory. Public interest theory, as we saw, that it is purely designed for the public interest, the entire public basically, and then as the name suggests, it is the basic fundamentals of public good would apply in public interest theory. While interest group theory is totally opposite of public interest theory, where interest group theory is catering only to the particular or selected section of the society. Now, public interest theory is a normative side of economics. So, we have normative economics and positive economics. So, if we categorize these two theories into normative and positive, the public interest theory will fall into the category of normative economics. As the name suggests, normative economics or theory, it would seek to explain what should happen in an ideal situation or the world. Normative theory would try to explain that what is the ideal way to regulate environmental good or environment. In contrast to this, interest group theory is positive, and by positive we mean that it attempts to explain why the world works the way it works. So basically, one is addressing the ideal situation from the normative side, one theory, that is public interest theory, and while the other theory, which is the interest group theory, is looking at the present situation, why it is so, the empirical and the present circumstances. Now, there could be rationale for the regulation for the as in case of public interest theory. We have discussed that there are three instances or three times or three circumstances where intervention is required by government. As we said, mentioned earlier, imperfect competition. Imperfect competition, particularly we have seen in case of natural monopoly. You would have read through that natural monopoly is the case where the traditional normative justification for government intervention or government regulation is very much viable. So, government intervention, which is a normative intervention justification, would apply in case of the imperfect competition, and these are generally the case of natural monopoly. Now, in the case of natural monopoly, such as we can take the case of electricity distribution companies. So, these are distribution companies which are responsible for transmission and distribution of electricity through various lines and installing the pillars and electric wires and pillars. So, however, the economic efficiency in general theory calls for a single firm. Here, in general, if we allow the competition to happen in case of imperfect competition, if we allow the competition to happen, it is definitely not feasible to set up multiple poles and wires and to connect the residences. So, every company that barges into the competition will be installing their own particular pillars, and that will create a chaos in the system or in the society where multiple wires and the pillars and the poles will be installed for the residents for the electricity as a source of power. The government therefore plunges in or intervenes by restricting the entry of new firms to guarantee a monopoly, a situation of monopoly, in addition to controlling the prices to protect consumers from the monopoly pricing. So, there is, once it restricts entry, there is a danger of falling into the trouble of monopoly, but that government controls by controlling the prices and protecting the consumers. So, a related role of the government is to prevent the undue concentration of power in the hands of the market, which is the multiple competing firms which represent the best organizational structure. So that again is the responsibility of the government while looking into the competition. In this case, government prevents collusions and restricts mergers, because mergers, in order to, in the name of monopoly, when the mergers happen and collusions happen, they may lead to a concentration of power in the hands of few that has to be guarded by the government while intervening in such cases, and that tend to create excessive market power. So there are various ways in government has to safeguard while intervening for the imperfect competition. On one side, it has to take care of the natural monopoly side, it has to take care of the interests of the consumers, and then also see the mergers and the viability of mergers, avoiding the concentration of power in hands of few group of people. Now, the second major rationale one can say for government regulation is the case of imperfect information. We have done for the imperfect competition. Now, imperfect information also calls for government intervention to a major extent. Since attaining information is considered very, very expensive, so the consumers may not even acquire complete information. So, because they may reach out to certain sources which are costlier, so they may avoid gaining the information or acquiring the information. Therefore, given the fact or assuming that consumers do not have complete information regarding the product which they are be interested in market, so this implies that each time one enters, suppose there is a grocery store and the consumers in the grocery store are interested in buying certain goods. So this implies that every time a consumer that enters the grocery store, one needs to conduct an extensive test on the safety of the food, because if they do not have information on the quality of the food, the safety of the food, then every time they enter and buy a product, a test has to be conducted, without, given that they do not have prior information regarding the well-being or the safety of the food. This is where the government needs to intervene to compensate for the incomplete information that is prevailing. So, what are the ways or the sources which may be very costly or expensive, considered as costly and expensive for the consumers? So, avoiding those sources which are costlier and expensive, government would come and support the consumers regarding the incomplete information. This may be done by encouraging safety related quality channels or the ways. Safety related quality channels or the ways in which, if a problem occurs in consuming the particular product, a firm can be held liable. A firm can be held liable of the particularly when the product which the consumer is consuming of that particular company or a firm will be held liable for providing that product if that product is not up to the mark quality wise. So that could be a case-wise study or case-by-case experience that can lead to a lot of harm to the firm side. Properly designed liability rules can also induce firms to provide an efficient level of safety related quality. So again the liability goes on to the firms, and that liability has to be taken guaranteed by the government. So government will have to intervene not only from the consumer side but from the firm side to avoid any kind of unforeseen situations of being held liable. So beforehand the government provides certain liabilities and rules and specifically designed, properly designed product liability rules which before launching the product. So government can also intervene in the market by specifying the acceptable levels of quality, such as regulations which are laid down on a particular food additives and food crop pesticides to be used. So these are basically general norms which are specified on the package of the product, which identify the product as safe and keeps the product uh, fulfilling the criteria of safety, and thus it helps both the consumer side and the producer side. So the third rationale we can say for government regulation, we have done the two rationale. First rationale under public interest theory was the imperfect competition. The second rationale we discussed was the imperfect information, and now the third rationale for government regulation is the area of provision of public good and bads. So when there are elements of publicness, as we said, that public good, so where there is an extent or degree of publicness involved in provision of any good, which, what do you mean by publicness? Publicness basically is characterized by non-rivalry or non-excludability. So there are two characteristics of publicness, that is the extent of non-rivalry character in that good or non-excludability. So these two decide or uh, categorize any good as the level of or the extent of publicness involved in that good. Then private markets are generally the elements of publicness in the private markets are basically leading to inefficiency by the markets. So if there is an extent of publicness involved in a good, then a market would fail in providing it efficiently. So therefore the government will have to intervene, and in this intervention to correct the problem. In this third type of rationale, government can intervene directly to provide these goods or bads at an efficient level, effectively eliminating the private market. And the best example for this particular case of public good could be the national defense. In the case of public bads, public national defense, as we said, that it is basically a public good, while if we pick up a case of public bad, the usual approach is for the government to define the set of institutions and regulations to govern the provision of these public bads. For example, government establishes a set of regulations to restrict the production of pollution. Now this would be categorized under bad, and how the government basically solves the problem or unfolds the problem, it is by the regulation of production, regulating the emission or pollution. Now we move on to the interest group theory. All what we did in the public interest theory was that there are three rationale for government intervention, and it provides the necessary reasons for government to intervene, the three cases we discussed. In case of interest group theory, let us now go deeper into to understand what is interest group theory. In the interest group theory, the regulation maintains that rent seeking is the primary rationale for regulation. We are providing the necessary rationale for regulation to happen in a region, in a country, or in a state. So the primary rationale in case of interest group theory is the rent seeking. Rent seeking is the explanation of why some regulations exist. This is referred to as a positive theory of regulation. We have seen that the public interest theory that was categorized as a normative economics, where we were addressing what should be, and where we addressed the three rationales of incomplete information, imperfect market, imperfect competition, and also the third one, the public good case. In case of interest group theory, that is considered under the framework of positive theory of regulation. Now, as rent seeking, we said, is the rationale for environmental regulation by government. So, rent seeking involves private individuals or firms using the government to guarantee extra profits, that is rent. We are addressing the extra profits generated out of the regulation as rent through the government mandated restrictions on economic activity. So there are certain beneficiaries out of this regulation. So those beneficiaries from this type of regulation, environmental regulation, are considered as rent seeking stakeholders. For example, if we pick up the case of US, then US requirements that a certain fraction of clean fuel gasoline additives be from the renewable sources is fundamentally addressing a subsidy to the producers of ethanol in the Midwest US. So we have seen that ethanol being added for a clean fuel gasoline, and then the beneficiaries, if this happens, then the beneficiaries would be ethanol producers. So this is what is the interest group theory. Groups that benefit from such regulation or lobbying of government for regulation provide them rent or profits that would not exist in the competitive markets. So this is regarding the um, interest group theory. We will continue with the discussion of political economy of regulation after a short break. Thank you so much.